Thank you all for joining us today for a joint venture webinar between AutoTalk magazine and Podium. Now, my co-host / our expert for today is Richard, and I'm going to let you say your surname.
Richard, thank you. It's Richard Lattemagi. Yeah, thank you for the introduction. I've worked with Podium. I've been with Podium for 2 years and I've worked in the automotive space the whole time. So yeah, excited to be here today. Thanks again for having us. AutoTalk's absolutely amazing, and I consume your media all the time. So happy to be actually part of the webinar today.
Fantastic. Now, we just a little bit of housekeeping before we start. As we mentioned, while you were sitting watching this awkwardly chat away there, rather than being in a nicely presented waiting room, we're here to talk about SMS today. But the key thing at the moment is chat. So if you're looking at the chat at the bottom corner of your Zoom screen there, then feel free to ask questions through this. We have a pretty compact group. So you are actually asking questions on behalf of the many more people who will be listening to this afterwards on YouTube or other recorded forms that we're going to put out. And also we'll make sure you have those recorded forms available, because you may want to send those off to some of your colleagues. Though maybe not all of them, maybe you want to keep a few of the commercial advantages that you're going to pick up to yourself. So SMS. Now, SMS is such a pervasive technology these days. And if I think back, I got my first mobile phone when I was about 17, going off to study away from home. And I couldn't afford to make telephone calls then, but I could send text messages. And everyone can text message. My elderly mother-in-law struggles with every form of communications, but is utterly prolific on a text message. And that, Richard, is something that needs to be kept front of mind when it comes to SMS and communications these days. There's so many options for communicating with customers, but few of them have that cut through, that broad appeal that SMS does.
Yeah, absolutely right, Richard. It is a very intimate form of communication. You know, we text our mums, we text our dads, our sisters, you know, family, our friends. And if a business can tap into that in a obviously respectful way, it is extremely powerful. And you're really aligning yourself with the way that consumers actually prefer to communicate with their friends or businesses as well.
Mm-hmm. And how important is that simplicity, that ability for just anyone to use that technology?
Oh, it's extremely important, right? It's you know, it's just how we want to communicate, right? If you know, but we'll show you stats afterwards. But if you look around you, right, people with their phones, it's often not like this, right? It's like this. So being able to have that convenience of text available, if you're talking business sense for a dealership, for example. Have the convenience available throughout the customer journey, from discovery stages to first point of contact, all the way through to purchase, finance, and after sales. It is extremely important. And when you talk about ease of use, to really, we want it to be convenient for the customer, but we also really want it to be convenient for the dealership staff as well. It's almost as important, right? When if it's difficult, if it's a lot of clicks, if it's not as easy as Facebook Messenger or WhatsApp or Podium, then your staff's probably not going to use it, or they may text off their personal phones, which is great as well. But if people texting off their personal phones, you probably, as a manager or as a dealer principal, you will not have the same oversight into the communication that dealership is having with customers.
You mentioned that when people have their phones these days, they are more like this than they are like this. Yeah. I mean, is there an almost call reluctance or a call phobia from a lot of people now? It's almost become too invasive, where a text message is kind of, you can do it without having to engage with anyone directly, and you can then answer or respond at your own time.
Mate, 100%, exactly right. And especially when we look at a dealership, I think sometimes when we're running a dealership, sometimes it can be a little bit easy to almost forget who are buying cars from us, because these are people that oftentimes don't know anything about cars, right? They just want to communicate with the dealership in a really easy way, and quite often, like you said, they're reluctant to pick up the phone and call straight away. So offering that a little bit like anonymous way of texting in is a great way of capturing new customers, right? And as we do those initial steps, that introduction through text, then we can always go, hey, would you prefer to have a quick phone call?
Mm-hmm. Now we've got these great tools these days, like the live chat on websites and so forth. And how do you think SMS compares to those? I mean, what's your take on why dealers should probably be more focusing on SMS than a live chat tool?
Yeah, that's a great question. Look, live chats have been great for many years. Sort of 5 years ago, when websites were important, but maybe not as important as they are today, especially in that sort of, I was going to say post-COVID world, but depending on where in Australia and New Zealand you are, we were still in that COVID state. Live chat has been great, right? They've really educated the market that you do need some form of a convenient way for consumers to contact dealerships from the website. But I think today, at the end of 2021, your website is really an extension of your showroom, right? It's your online showroom. And in a live chat scenario where oftentimes it's not actually someone at the dealership communicating with customers, but it's either, let's say, a robot or maybe a third-party provider like a call center, it's just not the customer experience that we want to give, right? And you have to understand, like, these are your customers' first touch points with you. And you don't want your customers talking to people who are not really passionate about the brand, and they may not know too much about your local community as well, or the dealership. So being able to offer the convenience of customers actually talking to someone at the dealership, whether it's your best sales guy, whether it's someone at service, your service receptionist, and through the convenience of text message, has been an absolute game changer for dealerships across Australia.
Mm-hmm. Now, you guys have recently done a big study on SMS and how it does relate to Australian consumers.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm going to make you host now, so you can share your information you've got there. But can you just give us a little bit of a rundown of some of the findings from that study?
Absolutely. Let me share my screen quickly, and we can go into it. Let me just go making the most out of SMS messaging. So, quick backstory is we ran a survey. This was surveying Australian consumers and Australian businesses.
Are you able to make that presentation full screen within your screen?
There we go. Is that better? Boom.
Perfect.
And I think one of the key findings there was a small disconnect in the way that businesses are communicating with their customers at the moment. And they realize that, which is 53% of businesses say their communication is old-fashioned, and the way that consumers actually prefer to communicate with businesses. And that's something that I think text messaging, Podium aside, like we always offer a suite of tools, but just text messaging in general, and really embracing that instant messaging, you're going to be able to capture a much wider market, and it's going to have some transformative effects on a dealership or a business as a whole.
Mm-hmm. And
so this slide here is quite interesting. Just kind of clarifying that a little bit is, 66% of businesses thought that customers prefer to engage with them through email, and 60% of businesses believe customers prefer to engage with business through phone calls. Richard, how many unread emails do you have?
No. Let me, if I had a look. I think it's into about 5 figures, but.
Right. Okay. How many unread text messages do you have?
Not a lot, and I guess I can prove that to an extent. Oh, there we go. My phone tells me 15. 15, right? Okay. 15. You got to click through a few of those, but that's manageable. For myself, at least, it's 0 unread text messages, and yeah, like you said, it's a 5-figure email. So emails are great for some things, but let's be honest, as a method of direct communication, it's shocking, right? Most people don't even check their emails anymore. It's just not a great way. Now, phone calls, look, extremely important for doing business,
But like I said, as a method of just that initial connection with the customer, it can sometimes be a bit invasive, and people are quite hesitant. Especially, one stat that's not in here is more than half of Australians actually screen unknown calls, right? Extremely difficult to actually get through to people if you've got like an online lead for a dealership, for example. And there we go.
Especially when you have that other aspect too of a lot of time when you're talking about phone calls through large PABX systems, you often get that no number or something, and people just don't answer these days.
Yeah, absolutely. You're absolutely right. So if we just go into this next slide here, this just shows, and actually let me just go back one more. Oh no, the notes are there. But basically there's a note on the bottom here that should say, in terms of the consumer preference, 89% of Australians would prefer either text or instant message, so use another messaging tool like Messenger, WhatsApp, right? So there's sort of like that tiny bit of disconnect there. And when we're specifically talking about text messaging, like SMSing, so 7 out of 10 Australians would prefer to text message a business if the option was available.
Wow, that's an impressive chunk of the market.
Yeah, 100%. Absolutely. That's most Australians.
Can we just clarify what we mean here by text? We're talking old-fashioned text messages, not iMessage, not other digital services, where there's the WeChats and the WhatsApps and all that. This is good old-fashioned text that works on every single phone in the market.
That's exactly right, Richard. This specific slide here, when we say texting, we mean the old-fashioned SMS texting, and when we say, I guess, instant messaging, that's when we're talking about adding in your Facebook, WhatsApp, and all of those other sort of options as well.
I guess look, if we want to take from those sectors, but we look to another market, well, it's not the same, but it's probably as pervasive as China. I swear, just about runs on WeChat. And while we're saying here that SMS is the way to go, in China that kind of is the equivalent. So
you're absolutely right. Yeah, WeChat, is absolutely massive there, and that's in a way, WeChat's interesting because obviously it is messaging, but everything runs through there, right? Like payments, things like that as well. Video chats, you've got your Facebook pages, but on WeChat. So in a way, that's like something that if we now start talking about utilizing text messaging in specific parts of the customer journey, when we're talking about running a dealership, this comes down to like, hey, how do we actually utilize it through discovery stage, for example? And that's some of the Podium offering where you can ask for customer testimonials, like Google reviews, to really stand out as the premium dealership in your area. How do we request payments, for example, like SMS payments, for which we've partnered with Stripe.
Wow.
So really, when we say that old-fashioned text messaging, it's actually an extremely powerful way if you start looking into it.
So just to be clear, you can handle payments through text messaging through the Podium system.
Yeah, that's right, Richard. Yeah,
wow.
Absolutely.
That's not something I kind of thought could be done. I'm being surprised here, even though I've read the material. Now you say, which parts of the dealership process you can incorporate SMS into. I mean, what are those points where Podium recommends incorporating SMS into the process?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me share my screen again, but I'll just change the slide because that will probably help you. There we go. No, that's not right at all. Let me just sharing. Just lost that. So you can really utilize text messaging throughout the customer journey, right? From literally even before first points of contact in that discovery stage, all the way through when someone's on your website, you can text into the dealership, organizing test drives, right? All the way through to purchase, asking for a Google review or maybe like a pre-CSI survey, all the way through to finance and after sales as well. So if you start to think about it, like the opportunities with SMS are endless. And one thing that probably takes you from beyond that like normal old school traditional way of using SMS is when you kind of put all of that into that one system, you can start to create templates. And when it's centralized, you can really kind of start to show the dealership branding and all of that stuff as well, which probably wouldn't be possible if you're just SMSing off your personal phone.
And of course, you don't have the same trackability or spread across the ability to have multiple people deal with a client that you would through the system.
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right. So that's the big thing, right? In terms of what Podium does, and again, you can do this with different SMS providers as well, but you really want to make sure that they can do it. The big thing with Podium, for example, is we really turn you into a textable business as a dealership, right? So a dealership will have one textable business number, and it's authentic two-way communication, right? It's conversational commerce. People can text back and forth. And let's say if I'm one of the sales guys, Richard L, right, and I'm texting away at you, and then there's a finance question, right? We're starting to organize finance. I can go in and assign that conversation with one click to the finance manager, and they can now organize finance through that same textable business number.
So it's beyond what we've seen in the past, where sometimes from service you'll get like a message through from a code that doesn't look like a phone number, and it says "do not reply" at the bottom, or so on and so forth. We're not talking about that kind of SMS. We're talking about something far more genuine, essentially.
Yeah, 100%. Look, there's space for those kind of texts as well. Like for a lot of dealership DMSs will text out like a service reminder, for example, where you can't reply, and maybe if the customer replies, it goes through as an email. But again, if we think about like the way consumers prefer to communicate with businesses, it's not like a one-way street, right? You want to have a communication, and that's the two-way SMS that really shines through. Absolutely.
Excellent. What other insights have we got from the study that you can share with us?
One, let me just share my screen again. This time it's actually the the presentation.
Yeah, sorry for distracting you, sending you down a side road there, but that's the fun of these things.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the most interesting things here is, you talked about how intimate text messaging is, texting by the numbers, right? 98% of texts get opened in the same day. But I actually think what's a lot more interesting is 90% of those texts get opened within the first 4 minutes.
Wow.
Right? So one really interesting stat that we know, and anyone that's working in a dealership probably knows, that whenever you get an online lead, the actual response time is critical to booking that person in for an appointment, for example. Right? And so JD Power looked into, hey, what's the correlation there between response times to actually booking someone in for an appointment? And what they found is if a dealership gets back to their customer within the first 20 to 30 minutes, they're more than 3 times likely to actually book them in for an appointment.
Wow.
Now, what was interesting is after 40 minutes, that appointment rate started to drop off dramatically. And there was almost virtually no difference between past sort of your 40, 50 minutes to a day on getting back to the customer. And the reason for that is you've lost a moment, right? The customer has kind of moved on with their day. They're not thinking about a test drive anymore. So being able to utilize text messaging where the response rates are really high, click-through rates are really high, and open rates within the first 4 minutes is going to be a massive game changer in the actual business outcomes.
Yeah, I'm looking at those numbers, and I mean, we have for the AutoTalk email updates, which go out twice a week, and you should all be subscribed to already, I'm sure. We have what's considered a pretty high open rate, of average a little bit either side of 40%. And ad agencies talk to us and are just amazed by that statistic. That is a massively high open rate, and then you more than 2.5 that on text message. That's just an epic number, 98%, unheard of.
Yeah. Why wouldn't you tap into that as a business, right? Like it is, right? And so yeah, absolutely. The click-through rates are pretty high as well. When we're talking about direct SMS marketing, it's a really, really powerful way of engaging with your customer. And again, that's throughout the customer journey.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Are there the same requirements in regards to unsubscribability and no contact lists in regard to SMS as there are to email?
Yeah, good question. So with the texting, there's sort of two ways, right? There's the actual direct communication, where we see an extremely low unsubscribe rate, where you're just communicating with the customer. One of the things that we do offer as well is a campaigns product, which is direct SMS marketing. Probably when we're talking about unsubscribe rates, the key difference between using a campaigns tool like Podium is when you combine that direct communication with the customer and the SMS marketing, and it's all coming from the one textable business number, it makes it a lot more personalized. So even though you might be sending out, let's say you've got a new, like a new model of BT50 out, right? Even though you might be sending out that direct marketing to 3,000 of your customers that have bought a previous model, because you've communicated with that customer through text message, your sales team has communicated, maybe a after sales manager has communicated with the customer through that text message. It seems really personalized. So what's going to happen is both the engagement rates are higher and the unsubscribe rates are quite a lot lower than sort of your more traditional like SMS, like a bit more of a spammy version of SMS, I guess.
Great. So now looking at this here, the response rate is far higher than anything else.
Yeah, that's right. The response rates, yeah. Response rates are incredible. Like, I think so this is a stat that we've specifically taken from our web chat product. So it's obviously different depending on how you engage the customer through text. But with web chat, what we say when the customer is engaged, so not the first inquiry that they've sent through, but when the salesperson or service manager has engaged and then they've sent a response, I think is just hitting about 80%, right? So response rates in terms of actually getting back and starting what we call like an authentic communication, where you're having a conversation with the customer, are extremely high. And that just comes back to that open rate. Like if you see a text message in the first 4 minutes, you're much more likely to respond because you're still in that moment, whether you want to do a test drive or whether you want to book in for service or you got a finance inquiry.
If you read it, you're far more likely to act on it. That's the reality.
Yeah, well, that's right, Richard. Absolutely. And so, yeah, I think that kind of ties in with this slide here. Is consumers crave conversations, right? And when we sort of talk about SMS, the way that at least Podium talks about it, and I know a lot of other providers do as well, we really want to make sure as a dealership or as any business in Australia, when we utilize text messaging, we want to make sure that it's two-way text messaging, right? There's definitely uses where you can send out like an automated, let's say a service reminder at 100%, that's great. But in terms of having those authentic conversations, whether it's a sales conversation, that has to be done through two-way text messaging. And 76% of Australians would be more likely to text or instant message a local business, knowing that is an actual real person that works at the dealership responding to their message. And one finding that was really interesting here, and I'm sure that everyone in sales knows this already, 56% of Australians report they're more likely to respond to a text if they got the name of the staff member in there. So if you think yourself as, Richard Evans from AutoTalk or Richard Lattemagi from Podium, consumers are 56% more likely to respond to you.
A question there, and this will be something of interest, I suspect, to the diehard salespeople. I mean, personal relationships are a big part of selling, and often it can be that salesperson's rapport with the customer through text, their own language, their own conversations. I mean, does putting a system like this in between the salesperson and the customer dilute any of that, cause any issues with that?
That's a great question. Hey, one of the things why text is so great is you can still have that little bit of personality shine through. It's probably less likely in an email. there's a lot of there's a lot of best practice. If you go with a tool like Podium, for example, there's a lot of best practice that will help dealerships set up, like templates for test drive inquiries, templates for our sales to service handover that we help you set up. But ultimately, it is your team driving it. So I think their personality can still shine through. And obviously, as salespeople, one of the things that we need to remember is every time that we can send a text message, we have the phone number right there as well, right? So, but what we want to remember is when a customer has texted the business, they want to be texted back as that initial inquiry at least. 100% after a few text messages, we can take that conversation into a phone call to maybe finalize the deal or appointment. But let's make at least those first steps in text. Let's make the customer feel comfortable. And then we can ask for their permission. Hey, do you mind if I call you instead?
It's like anything. A mode shift always risks dropping people, be it transport, be it anything. When you try to change someone from one mode to another, there's always that risk. So the key thing is if you can stay in that one mode, then that's going to be far, you're going to lose as little few people as possible.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Richard. And one of the things where that comes through as well is, we've talked a lot about like conversations with the customer, but let's have specific key points in text as well, right? And when we come back to getting payments for car deposits, for example, or when your service desk is shockers and you want to do after hours pickup, right? Getting SMS payments through text, right? Or maybe asking for a Google review or Facebook review, right? Or maybe a tool called Feedback, for example, because so one thing that's really interesting here, right? Like we talked a lot about the customer experience and the sales outcomes, but there is actually a very real effect on the CSI or MSI or GSI in utilizing texting throughout the dealership, the customer journey, right? JD Power did a massive survey in the US where I think they surveyed about 100,000 people. So it was about, I think, 28 or 29,000 sales customers and 70,000 service customers. And they noticed a massive increase in CSI. So I think for sales outcomes, it was about 10-point increase if a dealership uses text. And for service, it was a 31-point increase in CSI for dealerships that use text.
That is impressive. That's really impressive.
Yeah,
anything left in your stats catalog here, or?
I think we've thrown away on a lot of stats, right? Like one of the things that's interesting is dealerships, like local businesses, are so well positioned to utilize text messaging. We asked, like, hey, who would you prefer to text you? Is it like an online e-commerce business, maybe like a major chain, or a local business? And overwhelmingly 57% compared to 38% was local business.
Wow, that's impressive.
It is. It's the slide says it's the best way to target, engage your customers.
So if you could give me a brief rundown of what the Podium system does to help customers do this. As you mentioned before, there are possibly other ways to do it, but let's talk about Podium here. And what does Podium do to make it simple for dealers to use SMS?
Yeah, thanks, Richard. Let me see if we've got a slide there. There we go, Podium, folks. So again, everything that we talk about here, I'm sure there's other ways of doing it as well. We just do it really, really well. So when we talk, I might just kind of quickly take you through the customer journey then, right? So how do Australians actually decide which dealership to do business with, right? Is pretty much a lot of the time exactly the same as how they decide where to have dinner, or where to go for shopping or whatever it may be, right? They're going to Google. They're going to Google something like best Ford dealership near me, right? And then Google is going to pull up a list of, let's say, 5 different Ford dealerships, right? What we allow dealerships to do is really conveniently utilize text messaging to send out Google review invitations. We can automate that process, or we can personalize that process. And we work with 600 dealers across sort of Australia and New Zealand. Most, at least here in Australia, if you name the brand, we probably help the highest rated dealership in Australia collect those Google reviews.
Wow.
Now, if you've got great reviews, a customer is going to click on your Google listing, and most of the time they're going to go on your website. All right, so then we talked about web chat. Managed chat tools are absolutely great, but I think today in 2021, being able to provide the same level of service online as if someone physically walked into the dealership is going to be a game changer.
Mm.
It's going to lead to increased customer satisfaction and just better business outcomes, more appointments, more service bookings. It's just going to be better for business. And then we can, like I said, payments. So we partner with Stripe, massive payment processor, fully PCI compliant.
Who, for people who don't know who Stripe is, they're just world leaders in this kind of payment technology.
Yeah, absolutely right. So completely secure, which is like the most thing, easy to use. Shoot up a SMS payment link. It's obviously got your dealership branding on there, and you can just get paid like that. The great thing for the customer, everything's absolutely convenient. They don't even need to put in their card details. All they can do, if they got Apple Pay, they just tap their thumb or do this, and they paid you, a $500,000 deposit on account. Team chat. You want to share. You want to pump up your team. If someone gets a good review, you can share that. Feedback has been phenomenal for dealerships, right? We use this as a pre-CSI tool, where reviews go direct online. Feedback's just that little bit of a touch point, maybe before the OEM survey goes out. Just making sure, hey, Richard, how do you rate your service today at the dealership on a scale of 0 to 10? Mm. You're going to have, roughly about maybe like a 35% response rate, but it's going to be great for putting out those little fires, right? When the dealership does, maybe 30 ROs a day, it's just part and part. You can't get it right 100% of the time, right? So just catching that 1% or 0.1% where something may have gone a little bit wrong, and catching that before it becomes an OEM survey has been an absolute game changer as well for increasing that service retention.
It still gives you that chance to put things right as well.
Correct, exactly right. Yeah, it gives you that chance to put things right. And then there's other things that we do, video chat, just, virtual car handovers, things like that. Just shoot
so important at the moment.
Extremely important, yeah, especially in that sort of COVID world. And finally, obviously, SMS campaigns, which is direct SMS marketing as well. I think the key difference there, it's coming from your Podium textable business number. So like we said, just looks more personalized. Engagement rates are higher, and unsubscribe rates for marketing are much lower than traditional just SMS blasts.
So while we're talking about SMS today, I mean, this is part of a far larger, more integrated communications kind of end-to-end process, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%, mate. 100%, exactly.
Yeah. Excellent.
Did we have any questions in the chat?
No, we don't. We seem to have been fairly covered. But I guess the question I would have is, now, if people who've registered for this, they are going to get a copy of this video, and they will probably, I believe, get some information provided from Podium. But if people are watching this on the video afterwards, which we'll put on more broader distribution, what's the best way for them to get in touch with Podium to kind of learn more about this item, about the situation?
Look, we've obviously got a website, podium.com. Our head office is here in Melbourne, Australia. So if you're touring based, give me a bell. I'll send out my email address and my mobile number. I'm happy to drive out, but we obviously service the whole of Australia, and we service New Zealand as well. So happy to do a Zoom call like this and just do a more personalized demonstration and show you exactly how Podium would work for your dealership or your business. Fantastic. I saw there's one question here from
from James Hallowell. How do you make your text message look legit? In the last month, I've had almost a daily text message that has been spam or viral attack in some form. We have a DHL package at customs, and you need to click the link to pay. I think that's important because I do believe that certainly iPhones have spam filters on SMS now.
That's a great question. I get those as well, and they annoy the hell out of me. I think the main thing with Podium, for example, is we generally start that SMS conversation when a customer has prompted you. And this little bit comes back to that, like it's quite like an intimate and a little bit of a pervasive system. So I wouldn't like start conversations with customers without prompting them first or without getting their permission. And if you think about the way that Podium works, for example, right, like web chat, for example, they're the ones chatting in, right? Or a Google review, you're going to position it like, hey, do you mind if I send you a Google review, right? Or if you get a walk-in into the dealership, right, you're going to tell them, hey, I'm going to send you a text message. Now, as that conversation progresses, you really, whether you use Podium or not, you really want to make sure that that conversation flows through the one textable business number. So we had an example here. One of the blokes, obviously, it services a car. This is at a dealership, and we were going through the text messages, and in that sort of 2 years that he'd been with the dealership, he'd gotten text messages from 8 different numbers, right? Which as a consumer, you're just like, is this real? Is this like what's going on, right? So make sure that you use one textable business number. That's massively going to increase that, the presence. And then from a consumer point of view as well, they can just now save that number into their phone.
And I imagine that Podium would advise and restrict dealers from doing anything that's likely to get them whacked with a spam black mark, essentially, as well. Would that be fair?
That, yeah, 100%, absolutely right. Especially for the marketing side of it, absolutely, we obviously have to follow Australian texting laws.
Just a last call, I guess, for any other questions before we draw this down. Looks like we've got a thumbs up there that was a good answer. But look, I think we've covered everything pretty broadly there. Look, I'd like to thank you for coming and talking to us today, Richard, and thank everyone for attending. As we said, you'll receive a copy of this video afterwards, and we do encourage you to share that out. We'll also send that video out more broadly through our contact network. So thank you very much for everyone for attending. Thank you for your tolerance when we had the delay last week and the delay in letting people into the room today. But thanks again, Richard, for talking to us, everyone, today.
Thank you, Richard. Thanks for having me. Big fan of AutoTalk. So thanks again.
Awesome. Thanks very much, everyone.